Everyone, thank you for joining. Hopefully we'll have our users trickling in over the next few minutes. Huge thank you to Paul from Across Protocol for joining us today. We're going to be discussing Across and its deep level architecture, some of the unique concepts built around the Across contracts. I'm going to be learning in real time from Paul as well. I think Across and UMA are some of the more interesting and innovative products being built out in Web3. So thank you again for joining us, Paul. Would love to hear maybe a quick introduction of who you are and what you do, how you got into the space, and how you ended up with Across quickly.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. It's actually really cool to be given the opportunity to participate and present Across. So my name is Paul. I am a developer engineer on Across Protocol, and Across is a fast optimistic bridge that can be used to bridge from EVM L2s to and from Ethereum and different EVM compatible chains. A little bit about my background. So I'm educated as a software engineer, and I kind of got the DeFi bug or the Ethereum bug in probably like 2021 or something like that, and kind of dived in and Across actually started in late 2021, and I kind of just jumped in and started having a bit of a role as someone who's doing support for the bridge and helping users to kind of understand if their funds got stuck or things like that. We could kind of do a bit of troubleshooting. So I kind of worked on that for a few months, and eventually there was an opportunity to kind of step up as a more active contributor to Across. So I jumped at that opportunity as quickly as I could, and have just been working, very heavily on Across ever since. So that's kind of the short intro that leads us to this point.
Amazing. And maybe you could share like a couple quick details about the types of tech stacks you were working on before. You mentioned you got the DeFi bug in 2021, which is relatively recent. What were the tech stacks you were interested in before that helped you kind of launch off into Solidity and the Ethereum stack?
Yeah, so I've got like a traditional kind of embedded software background, actually, and a very heavy interest in Unix systems. Did a lot of work with Linux in the past, lots of C programming and shell scripting, a little bit of Python, but basically working in product development of embedded systems. So very, very, very different to what I'm focusing on now. It was very much like software as a product, and we often had like hardware development teams as colleagues as well. So there was a lot of vertical integration there, and designing, developing products, and shipping them out. And that was in actually for aviation and for maritime kind of safety applications. So yeah, it's a bit of a change for me to switch over to be working in in the bridging space and to be working on Ethereum. But I think that it's been a good background. It gives there's some parallels basically between the kind of resource constraints that we had in embedded and the kind of the considerations you have to have when you're working on smart contracts.
That is super interesting. I don't know all that many engineers who've had an embedded systems type background and come into the space. So I'm sure you have a really unique perspective to share with us as well. Maybe we could start before we jump into your presentation with like a minute overview of what separates Across from some of the other bridging protocols that are available, like Hop or Wormhole or some of the other more mainstream bridges that our users may know.
Yeah, so I think Across and even kind of UMA behind the scenes is there's a lot of people working on the protocols that have like a financial, like a traditional financial background, and this has given like a bit of a unique perspective on how bridging can be done. And when you combine that with the kind of the optimistic mindset, which is, as I found, something that is not, at least for me, it's not like a natural thing to do to have. But a lot of people in the team have got this like very, very optimistic, they follow optimistic design patterns because, they've designed systems that allow you to have those assumptions. And so that's kind of given across like a bit of a unique structure, I think. And like a lot of the bridges that you see these days, they're kind of AMM based bridges where you'll have like a bridge or contracts on either end where there's an AMM pool. You'll get the bridge will mint you a token when you arrive on the chain, and then you have to swap it through, and you get maybe some slippage. Across is more like a lending protocol, actually, which is interesting. So I kind of view it as a way of transferring risk. Like there's different actors in the system. I'll talk a little bit about that later. But basically, it's a process of like transferring risk from one user to the next, and just providing liquidity to users in order to bridge, basically as a loan. So they're not actually doing any swaps in the process.
Interesting. Okay. I am fascinated by the parallels between different DeFi primitives and bridges, and maybe we'll cover that a little bit more as you work through some of the architectural concepts here. So if you're ready, I am super happy to have you here, and I'd love to jump straight into this presentation.
Great. I guess to start with just an overview of what actually I'm going to discuss. So we'll probably start with like, why does Across exist? Like what is the reason that an organization goes and says like, hey, I want to build a bridge. And then we can kind of discuss some of the core like concepts, components and actors that exist in order to make Across work, because it's a little bit like an ecosystem actually, with different actors who are incentivized to do different things. And once we've got that out of the way, then we can cover some architecture, like what is the kind of the structure of the different contracts that exist in order to make Across work. And then we can take a bit of a deeper dive into the contracts that we call the HubPool and the SpokePool, and can look at those from the kind of the lens of, if I am in this particular role, what is my flow? What am I doing? So I think that we can just start with that, and we'll see where we end up. So just to start with the why. The question is like, why build Across? And the interesting thing is obviously with Ethereum, there's this kind of scaling issue that has been addressed by teams building layer 2s. And obviously, when you want to bridge funds from a layer 1 to a layer 2, you have to go via a kind of a canonical bridge that is operated by that protocol. If you want to withdraw, this is what we've seen, especially with the optimistic protocols like Optimism, Arbitrum, and then obviously Base as well, which is an OP stack chain. You have this like 7-day withdrawal challenge window, which is like a huge barrier for a lot of people, because people don't want to sit and wait 7 days for their funds to come back. Obviously, with some of the ZK chains like ZK Sync, the withdrawal period is actually 24 hours, so that's a little bit better, or it's quite a bit faster. But still, 24 hours is a pretty big barrier for a lot of people. Like people kind of they want things quickly, they want things instantly, and basically there's this kind of opportunity for other protocols to step in and figure out like how can we give users funds quickly, and then reconcile the actual transfers on the back end, or how can that kind of be balanced out. So I think that's like one point.
Okay.
And that's of course to go from like an L2 or another L1 back to Ethereum. But often users, like particularly on Across, we see like ZK Sync to Arbitrum and back is actually a popular route. So if you think about like, I'm on ZK Sync, I want to go to Arbitrum, it's like I've got to wait 7 days. Like I've got to do my withdrawal, wait 1 day, and then I can go to Arbitrum. That takes like 10 or 15 minutes. But it's like, maybe I want to go there straight away. Maybe I don't want to spend my gas on mainnet to like finalize my withdrawal and then make my deposit to Arbitrum. So the other thing is that there's an opportunity here to say like, you can go from ZK Sync directly to Arbitrum. And that's like not something that neither ZK Sync nor Arbitrum offer that. So you need other protocols like Across to step in to provide that. And then the third thing is like, once you're in a position to kind of aggregate all of these actions, you can actually start to kind of net some of the flows out. So if you think you've got people going from Arbitrum to Optimism, and maybe Optimism to Arbitrum, like if they're bridging the same tokens in similar amounts, like actually you end up being able to kind of just net some of those amounts off, and then you end up with smaller differences. So you can basically end up gaining quite a bit of efficiency by not having to literally transfer funds back and forth all the time. At some point, if you've got appropriate liquidity on either chain, things kind of they kind of settle, and you end up kind of facilitating transfers on both ends without actually moving too many funds, via the slow bridges.
Amazing. Okay. So you're aggregating liquidity on either side of the bridge typically. And if there's sufficient liquidity for a bridge, you don't necessarily need to move those specific funds immediately.
Yeah, so typically we maintain like some kind of target balance on each of the different chains that are supported, and there's like ranges where that balance can go up or it can go down, and once it gets to a certain point, then there's like a manual rebalance, but you can natively get balancing just via users transferring funds in and out, going to and from different chains. So you basically capture a benefit from that, and then like when you actually do need to rebalance, then you can use bundling. Bundling is kind of a big theme that we talk about a lot, and we use that basically to save gas. So
fantastic. Yeah, I think the routing between one L2 and another L2, even between ZK and optimistic L2s, is super innovative. I remember during the height of the NFT bull run, if I'm not mistaken, it was like Q1 of last year when gas was super high, waiting to bring liquidity from Arbitrum over to mainnet, taking 7 days was a huge detriment to trading potentially when liquidity was required. And the deposits on mainnet to bridge over were incredibly expensive, like upwards of $70, $80 at a time.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, like we are in a way spoiled by low gas prices at the moment, but
yeah,
we have been. I was also there through like especially late 2021 when gas was insane.
Yeah.
And, at that point, that's when you really become sensitive, and that's where bundling is really worthwhile. So I actually can see that I missed a slide previously, and that was also what I wanted to intro with was like, what is Across? Across is an optimistically verified bridge. It is backed by UMA, or is built on top of the UMA optimistic oracle. Launched in November 2021, as I mentioned. It is supported by the Risk Labs Foundation, which is a foundation that's just set up to support the ecosystem and to kind of drive protocol development in the right direction, and it sponsors people to work on the various protocols, UMA and Across. And then the tokens that are supported also in Across is Ether and WETH. Of course, that's the big one, but there's also USDC, DAI, USDT, wrapped Bitcoin, and then we have like a tail of some of the smaller ERC20 tokens that are supported, for different protocols. And in terms of the chains that we support, it's also ZK Sync and Base. Those are the two most recent additions, which are also very, very popular users. And then we have Arbitrum, Optimism. They're the obvious two optimistic L2s that have been around for quite a while now. Polygon, and of course Ethereum as well.
Fantastic. Thanks for the overview. Great.
Also, just a little bit about traction of Across. I will preface this chart by saying this is some a kind of a graph that was produced by our data team. There's a lot of monitoring and analysis that goes on behind the scenes to understand what users are valuing in bridging, and what are we doing, or like what is Across doing that's getting traction with users. So what this basically shows is Across's volume as a percentage of total volume relative to of the routes that it supports relative to the other chains. So what we've seen is there's been like quite an uptick in the last couple of months, and we kind of attribute that actually to like there's been a lot of building on Across through the last kind of year and a half, 2 years, and also like adding some of these new chains has been quite interesting. And I think I'm not sure like how well known Across is as like a brand of bridge. I think obviously when people think of bridges, there are some bridges that really pop into mind, but actually I think there's probably quite a few users who are actually using Across maybe without actually realizing it. So anyone who goes via a bridging aggregator, if you pick a token and a route that Across supports, you might actually be ended up routed through Across, just as a result of it being kind of the cheapest or the fastest. Like typically these different aggregators can classify based on speed, cost. Users can kind of tune their settings there. So there's been a big uptick in volume, as you can see, and we kind of think that there is a bit of traction with what's happening, and it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops over time as we move forward as well.
Awesome. Really happy that great teams building good products are getting the lion's share of the traction here. I see CCTP. Is that the Circle product?
Yeah, correct. So that's the new bridge which Circle has launched, and obviously that's still in the early days.
Wow.
And it's obviously over time you would expect that it's going to accrue quite a bit of volume itself. But it also actually presents an opportunity for Across, because Across is like a bridge that actually builds on top of the bridges in some respects. So it uses the like Arbitrum bridge, the Optimism bridge, ZK Sync bridge, Polygon bridge, and CCTP is like another bridge that can be used by Across in order to move funds. So Across will be able to have like a speed advantage over CCTP, but would be able to fall back on CCTP in order to use it for rebalancing. So it's actually going to be like the addition of CCTP is going to be quite positive for Across.
Okay, so in terms of your value of funds being transferred on a daily basis, you effectively are capturing all value that the market is accruing in terms of all bridging users. So like a rising tide floats all boats kind of thing.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, like we have obviously been through a period where there's been like reduced volumes. This kind of bear market that has everyone has endured has gone on for quite a while, and it has meant that volumes are low. But as a percentage, it's still a useful metric to say like what is our relative competitiveness, and yeah, that's we think that this is kind of heading in the right direction.
Great. Well, let's jump in.
Cool. So some of the concepts, like we discussed earlier, Across is a lending protocol as a bridge. The way that it works is that we have these actors called relayers, and they exist just to provide short-term loans to bridge users. So what happens is a user will make a deposit on one chain, and a relayer on their destination chain will just front them the capital optimistically, with the expectation of earning a fee for doing that and getting a refund from the protocol later on. So the typical period where a relayer has made a fill for a user and is then awaiting repayment is about 1.5 to 2 hours at the moment. That's actually a configurable time period, but we have this kind of periodic settlement that goes through and says, let's take a snapshot of the previous X number of blocks on each chain and compute everything and perform settlement there. One of the driving concepts that really flows through to everything that is done is to just really try and simplify the contracts and to push the complexity of kind of complex computation off chain. And in order to do this, there's like a very heavy focus on emitting events that contain the right information. And I think actually there was a call with, I think it was Envio, the protocol who was like, they were talking about this like last week on Solidity Fridays or very recently, and they were talking about like why this is important, why this event-driven paradigm saves gas, saves on audit cost, things like that, and reduces complexity in contracts. So actually thought it was quite good. It's actually good to follow on after them because it fits in very, very much with actually what they were explaining.
Right. The event-driven paradigm seems to be kind of a staple of modern Solidity, I would say. So you're handling a lot of that complexity in your actual dApp architecture itself.
Yeah, part of it in the dApp, but Across also has there's a very big component of Across, which is bots that operate off chain, and they effectively go and scrape all of the events that have happened in order to kind of compute basically, or to determine what has happened, and then the whole thing rests on various bots being able to agree on the state. And so that's kind of where we get to this last point about settlements can be disputed. So we have a bot that goes through and it scrapes all of these events, and then it will there's some rules that it follows about how to structure them, how to validate the different events, and then it will kind of produce what's called a proposal, which specifies that we should issue refunds to these relayers, and it should be this amount, and it should be these tokens, and these are like the fees that were captured, and that happens as a proposal. And the idea is that that is subject to a challenge window. So it's kind of optimistically proposed, and then it can be disputed if somebody thinks it's incorrect. And in the event of a dispute, it actually gets escalated. And this is the beauty of being able to build on top of the UMA optimistic oracle, is that problem kind of just gets escalated to UMA, and it is resolved in the UMA ecosystem. And it's not actually anything that Across needs to concern itself with anymore. So that's kind of another thing that helps to kind of keep the protocol a little bit simpler, and to kind of leverage the design of an already mature ecosystem with the UMA optimistic oracle.
Right. It really plays into the values of like DeFi composability. You're building on top of UMA, other developers can come and build on top of Across. I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, it is actually really exciting, and on that kind of aspect of building on Across, there's something coming up as well, which we think is going to be interesting for other protocols to leverage. So we'll get to that a little bit later. So I can talk a little bit about the core components. So in Across, we have this model which we call a hub and spoke model, and we have this what we call the HubPool contract. This is like the mothership of Across. It's deployed on Ethereum mainnet. It's where the majority of the liquidity lives. It's where users will make their deposits, and it's where the proposals are made. And it's also kind of an admin control interface for the spoke pools, which are deployed to each of the various chains. And this hub pool contract is facilitating this kind of settlement cycle, and it's got rules to enforce that can only happen after we've concluded safely that the proposal is okay. And then, of course, when you have a hub, you need to have spokes. So we have spoke pools on each of the supported chains, and this is the contracts that the users interface with. This is where they'll make a deposit into, and when they're receiving funds on another chain, this is where they'll receive their funds. They receive their funds via this contract, and then when settlement occurs, periodically, there's the relayers that get refunded out of these pools as well.
So is this at all comparable to a factory pattern?
There's no factory contract here, but we have what we have on the spoke pool contracts is we have an inheritance structure, because each chain basically needs to have slight variances in the way that the spoke pool works, but there's a core component that is unchanged, and that's the user interface. That's the interface that handles deposits, withdrawal, relays being filled. It handles execution of refunds and these kinds of things. So we've kind of got this core part, and then there's this extra layer on top that is added, to make it compatible with whatever particular chain is being deployed to. But there's no actual factory that's implemented in order to deploy.
Cool, understood. Perhaps you'd like to dive deeper into the hub and spoke pools there.
Yeah. So in order to do that, we'll probably just talk quickly about the actors. So we obviously have the user or the depositor who, they want to go from one chain to another. They make a deposit on, let's say, Arbitrum, and they say, I want to go to ZK Sync. Here is my tokens. Here's the fees. And then they just, seconds later, they get their funds on that destination chain. The next actor is the relayer, and this is actually permissionless, so anybody can be a relayer. And we actually have a community of relayers who are innovating in various ways to kind of maximize their share of the transfers that they can capture. And so what these are doing is they're sitting there and monitoring each of these spoke pools, and they're saying, how do we, they're kind of monitoring for events to be emitted to say a deposit has occurred. And then they actually, at the moment, they kind of race and try and beat each other on speed in order to make a fill on the destination chain. And so that's kind of like a standalone role. And the relayer just sits there and they continue to make fills until they've exhausted their capital, and then they get refunds periodically. And the whole refund cycle is kicked by the proposer and executor. And so this proposer is again, it's kind of repeating the same process of saying, let's scrape all of the events and make sure, apply some validation criteria to these events, make sure that people are not trying to steal funds or incorrectly claim refunds for transfers that didn't happen. And then it will go through periodically and just propose this settlement to the hub pool, and then that goes through this challenge window where we have 1.5 hours to dispute, and if it's not disputed within 1.5 hours, then it basically can be executed by anybody. And then that challenge window, then we have the disputer that sits in here. It's monitoring very quickly, like it's periodically monitoring and saying, do I agree with the proposal that is sitting in the hub pool contract? And if it doesn't agree, then it will submit a dispute, and that effectively nullifies the proposal. And so then you go back and somebody else has to make a proposal. So I have a little bit about the architecture here, and here you can see on the left hand side we have mainnet. This is it's a very kind of plain diagram, but it's quite simple, which is something that I really appreciate. And so we've got this hub pool, and you've got the LPs depositing into the hub pool, and then the data worker is proposing kind of settlement bundles to the hub pool.
Could you perhaps zoom in to the left side of that and we can track along? It's just a little far out. Far out in a figurative sense and a literal sense.
Let me see if I can zoom in. I'm actually not sure how to zoom here. Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure how I can zoom here on this one. We can try and bring it up.
Amazing.
It's actually
a good engineer always knows how to find a workaround.
So we have this diagram here. I can bring it up. Error loading page. Oh no.
We're watching debugging happen in real time.
This is not great. I don't think I can get that any bigger.
No worries.
I do have it blown up on another. I guess we'll skip this one, but we've kind of described this hub pool, spoke pool architecture. We have spoke pools on each chain. We have the hub pool on Ethereum, and we also have a spoke pool on Ethereum. So if we can go into the spoke pool itself, we have. I don't know if this diagram here is like a little bit easier to see.
Yeah, that looks great. Thank you.
Yeah, so what we'd have here is like a sender, this box over here on the top right. They will deposit USDC, WETH, or wrapped Bitcoin, anything else, into the spoke pool. And then on another chain, we have, or like actually outside of the context of all of the chains, we have the relayer that's sitting there, and it will see that deposit event has occurred, and anyone can monitor for those. And then it will do like a profitability calculation. It will say, like, do I have the necessary fees in this transfer in order to make it worthwhile to loan the funds out on the destination chain? Gas cost is a major factor on whether or not the relayer will take that opportunity. And then, if it does, like you would on another chain, you have this relayer kind of sitting here as well, and it will just say like, hey, I want to fill this relay with the details of the deposit. And it's important from that fill that you can generate an event that can then be reconciled against a deposit. And so this is what this kind of data worker proposer role is doing, is it grabs the fill event, and then it will go and grab the deposit event and say, like, do these actually match 100%? And if they match 100%, then we'll say, okay, that's a fair relay. So what I can do, we can just have a quick look at the SpokePool contract itself. So we have this deposit function here. The deposit function obviously takes like a recipient, the token, amounts, destination ID, a fee, relayer fee percentage, which is like, it's like a multiplier of the amount that says like, I'm going to give X amount of this transfer to the relayer for their for filling the deposit. There's a quote timestamp which reflects at what point we will reconcile the impact of this transfer, and that reflects back. That's a timestamp that's actually related back onto our hub pool. Then we also have a message, and we have a max count, which is actually not used really at the moment. And in order to do this, like, we obviously need to verify, like, as the very first thing, we verify, like, is this a route that we support? Because obviously anyone can submit, they can say, I want to go to chain 700, and with token, Shiba Inu or something like that. We have like a mapping in our spoke pool that says like, do we support this origin token going to this destination chain ID? So that's like a very simple check. We require that the fee is not too high. Like usually the fee that the depositor has to pay is like less than 50%. Of course, 50% is a very large fee. You don't normally want to do that, but what happens is like if someone makes a very, very low value deposit, then the fee can actually start getting up to 50% to account for the destination gas cost. We have this quote timestamp here as well, which is a timestamp that the user supplies, but needs to be resolved back to a block on the hub pool. And the hub pool is obviously where our liquidity is stored. And so we need to understand, like, if we're going to loan these funds out of the hub pool for X period of time, what is the effect? Like, how much is it taking our utilization? How much is it increasing our utilization? And so there's actually a rate model that applies to the hub pool. So it's basically, if your utilization is very low, then in order to increase the utilization by making a transfer, the fee that you will pay is typically relatively low. If our utilization is like 80% and you're taking it from 80% to 81% or something like that, typically you'll pay a higher fee for that. And so what that does is it just builds this kind of reflexivity into the system, so that when demand is really high, the fees go up, and it kind of allows the protocol to kind of recover, and to kind of, it slows the activity on the protocol, so that it buys time for funds to arrive back over those slow bridges in order to bring utilization down, or to attract more capital via kind of depositors into the hub pool.
Right. So maximizing fees captured while minimizing congestion.
Yeah, it's definitely like an anti-congestion kind of thing, to basically to prevent the liquidity from being overcommitted as well. Each deposit gets a deposit ID. This is a unique ID per chain. It just increments on every deposit. We have this deposit counter, which is not strictly used at the moment. We have experimented a bit with a new model for kind of balancing and deploying on chains where we don't have a way of manually rebalancing via canonical bridges. So this is kind of prepared for that, but that model is not actually active. If we talk about supporting like the native token on a chain, like Ether versus WETH, most of the chains that we support, they are using Ether as the native token. So we do actually support that someone can deposit Ether. What we will do then is wrap it, so that when relayers and the different pools, they're working with WETH and not Ether. So when something gets deposited, then it will be wrapped. And then we actually have a funds deposit event, which is emitted. And this contains all of the details of the deposit, and that's it. And one of the interesting side effects of this is this is like very gas efficient, and we have actually seen this can be more gas efficient, for instance, than bridging to Arbitrum via the native Arbitrum bridge, or bridging to zkSync via the native zkSync bridge. And this is actually something that users really like. So basically, by minimizing the gas cost for a deposit, we kind of do the minimum that we have to, but we push a lot of the complexity off chain, and then users see the benefit by paying lower gas fees.
Amazing. And do you have a concept of a priority fee? So say a user wants to get a massive volume of liquidity over for a time-sensitive trade or for time-sensitive deposit. Do you rely on the base layer chain infrastructure to handle their sense of urgency, or do you have a facility to speed track the process as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's kind of two aspects to it. Like the first one is just to get the deposit confirmed. And obviously, like in that case, it's really about like how much gas and what's the priority fee that the user sets for their transaction. So if the user underprices the transaction, then they'll have to kind of go and do a speed up, like reissue that same transaction with a higher fee in order to get mined. So that's like something that's outside of Across. But once a deposit makes it into Across and gets confirmed, what we can see sometimes is that the relayer fee percentage might not be set high enough. Like if you have a gas spike on the destination chain, suddenly maybe it becomes unprofitable to make that fill. And so what this relayer fee percentage does is normally we try and spec that with enough buffer. But if the user actually wants to increase that, they can actually do what's called a speed up. And so I can just go down here. Here we have speed up deposit. And so this is like a user will say, they will reference a deposit that they have made, and they will say, I want to update this deposit, and I want to specify, I can change the recipient, I can change the message that is embedded with it. We can talk about the messaging a little bit. And I will, what else can they change? They can set a new fee. So what they can do is they can bump up the fee that they're willing to pay, and then the relayers will see, they'll see, hey, here's this deposit, and by the way, it's actually been broadcast with a new fee, and they will recompute that profitability calculation that they do, and then they'll consider whether or not that's profitable for them to fill. So there is that mechanism to kind of update a deposit once it's already been submitted.
I see. So you can call a deposit with a custom relayer fee percentage from the user side.
Yeah. The user gets like just has a way of saying like, hey, I want to make that faster. And again, like the way that's done is we have an EIP 712 signature, which gets basically emitted in an event, and again, like our relayer bots are sitting there and they're puzzing for these events, just to see if they can turn an unprofitable fill into a profitable fill.
Fantastic.
So that's basically the depositor flow, which is again simple. Like there's not a lot of complexity there. It's really like engineered to be as simple as it possibly can be. But we can talk about the fill flow as well. That is also in the SpokePool contract, and just see if I can find that one here with the relayer functions in the contract. And we have fill relay here.
These contracts are structured very intuitively, I have to say, for such a widely used code base. It really is an elegant solution to the problem.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's I have to relay that to the engineers who developed them initially, but I certainly appreciate it as someone who works up against the contracts that they are clean. Yeah. And in this case, you can see like when a relay goes to make a fill, there's kind of it's very reminiscent, in fact, of a deposit. Like you kind of get all of the same inputs that are specified. The additional one that gets specified here is the deposit ID, because the deposit ID is not known by the depositor when they make the deposit. That's generated by the SpokePool on deposit, and it's emitted in the deposit event. But the relayer also gets to specify like how many tokens does it want to send. So the relayer can actually, there can be a fill, say there's a fill for like $1 million, like that someone's made a deposit of $1 million and it's waiting to be filled on the destination chain. You can actually have multiple relayers combine in order to make that fill. So like one relayer can say, I want to spend all my $10,000 filling that, and another will say, well, I've got 100,000, so I'll also do that. And they can all actually work together. Like the protocol supports that multiple relayers can combine to make the depositor whole on the destination chain, which is it's a little bit underused at the moment. Like it's not something that most of the relayers are implementing, but the protocol supports it, so it can be supported basically via an upgrade in the bots.
I see. So do you anticipate then that as volume continues to increase, like if we hit a bull rally, for instance, and a lot of people wanted to benefit from the potential yield of being a relayer, we'll see smaller parties come in and proportionally share in those?
It's certainly an option, yeah, for sure. And like occasionally, with some of these really large transfers, like we have seen people bridging like 10 million, 15 million in a single transfer. It's not everybody who's got the funds available to fill that in a single shot. So it is like it gives a scalability potential to Across that you could actually have lots of smaller relayers that combine in order to make a fill. So
very cool.
So there's a little bit of validation that happens on the fill. We kind of pack it into a structure called this relay execution structure. That all gets hashed, and this is like a kind of a collision protection. So if two relayers are racing to make the same fill, the collision protection says it will detect like one of them will come first. If they both supply identical information for the fill, then they will get the same hash as the output. And that hash tracks like what is the percentage of this fill that has been completed. And so if the percentage is like 100%, it means that the one that comes second, they'll actually get a failed transaction. It will revert, which is not, it's actually very nice for that second relayer, but it does protect them from like sending their funds and not getting refunded. So that's kind of like a bit of a safety valve there that stops relayers from kind of losing funds by just being like slightly slower or paying slightly less in a gas fee on their fill.
Right, and so they're paying gas for those reverted transactions?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and that is actually a point that the relayers like. It would be ideal if the relayers could avoid having those collisions entirely, so then they wouldn't pay those fees at all. That might be coming in some form of a protocol upgrade at some point. There's various opportunities that we have to give the relayers the ability to kind of compete without actually having to submit a transaction and find out whether they were fast enough.
Right, the lesser of two evils, effectively. Rather lose your gas than lose your funds.
Yeah. Well, ideally you would lose neither, but at the moment
yes.
We have the lesser of two evils. Yeah. So we have this kind of internal method here, internal function here called fill relay. It's the one that does a lot of the heavy lifting. You can see that we also have this like fill relay with updated deposit function here as well. That's again like if someone has issued a speed up on their deposit because it was unprofitable or they wanted it to be prioritized faster, then the relayer will actually call fill relay with updated deposit, and they will supply this additional speed up, which is including like the message if they've changed it, and then the signature so that we can actually verify that the depositor did actually authorize that speed. And that one you can see is actually it's a very, very similar function. It just has this additional call to say like verify the updated depositor message, and that will just revert if the signature doesn't match on that message that they've signed.
Cool. So that's the SpokePool contract.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you think we should take a look at here that's of interest?
Yeah, I'm a little bit conscious of the time. Obviously, this is running very quickly, but we can have a very quick look at this fill relay. So this is actually what's doing the heavy lifting down here. We do a little bit of fee validation. This is where you get the kind of the collision protection as well to just make sure that the relay has not already been filled. If it does, it will revert. And then there's a bit of adjustment because you can have like if 5 different users make the same deposit or make the fill and they all the fills, then like it will compute like, okay, what's the remaining, and it will fill the remaining amount up to the amount that the relay has authorized. Yeah, so what we can do, we can flip back to the slides here. We'll talk a little bit about composability. So you might have seen that there was this mention of a message in the deposit, and this is like a composable. This is like an arbitrary data payload that a depositor can submit, and during the fill, if there is a message and the recipient is a contract, then what we'll do is we will execute a function on that contract called this across message handler. And the use case for this is like maybe someone wants to bridge some funds, but then they want to do something on the destination chain. This could be like they do a swap, or they emit an event or some kind of thing on their own contract. It's very, very open, and it's very it's kind of a primitive feature, but it will enable like people who are integrating across or building on top of across to just have access to this like basic messaging feature that they can implement interesting things on top of.
Right. So maybe some of the exciting functionality that this allows for is, let's say I'd like to benefit from a swap that has more liquidity in the asset that I'm purchasing on Arbitrum, but I'm stuck on mainnet. So perhaps I could, in a single transaction or a single UI action, bridge over to Arbitrum, make the swap, and then bridge back. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, we usually don't do the bridge back, but there's like definitely scope for something like that to happen. So yeah, it's open. Some of the use cases that we have seen is like someone maybe wants to like bid on an auction on another chain, so they like submit their funds and then they submit their bid in the message, and then the recipient contract on the other end like unpacks that, verifies that they've sent enough tokens to meet their bid, and then you can kind of maybe conduct an auction on a chain where you don't actually have your tokens straight away. So that's like kind of a simple example of how this might be used as well.
That's super fascinating. I think, we all talk about UX as the choke point for mass adoption of DeFi and blockchain in general. But I think a really overlooked aspect of adoption is this level of composability that we enable. End users should not have to be aware of interacting with 4 different primitives to conduct something that would otherwise be a relatively simple function to them at a high level, right? So I think the fact that you're enabling this really makes it possible for people to create beautiful front ends on top of these composable functions that can have users gain more flexibility, which is awesome.
Yeah, it really, it kind of also opens up potentially the door for things like intents and, some of these like more abstract primitives or abstract kind of concepts that we're starting to hear about more and more. So
cool. Perhaps we could have you on in a future show to also chat about some of the future possibilities and where the code base is going.
I definitely think there would be people from the protocol who'd be interested to discuss that. Yeah.
Amazing.
Cool. So I'm actually conscious that we've kind of hit, or we're very close to the top of the hour. I have like a whole extra section on like the HubPool, but I can just see that we're basically not going to get through it. So I guess what I can do is I can very quickly run through like what we have is proposals. These proposals is this periodic settlement. They get submitted to the HubPool, and are actionable after a challenge window. And so we have this a function called propose root bundle and dispute root bundle. These we have this disputer bot that sits there and can kind of action those. The proposer will make the proposals. The disputer will dispute if it disagrees. After the challenge window, we have another bot called the executor, which will come along and kind of execute that proposal. And what that means is we'll send tokens out of the hub pool. We'll send them over bridges to the spoke pools. And we also send messages out of the hub pool over the canonical bridges to the spoke pools. And those messages and tokens, they end up in the spoke pool, and then we can execute them out of the spoke pool subsequently. So I won't show the code for this one, But what it is it's like a simple thing. Like it's a similar kind of concept to the deposit flow. So you submit something, we do the minimum validation on it that is required, and then we outsource a lot of the verification activity to the bots that run, and they kind of sit there and they verify. They just verify that they can produce the same result. And so the HubPool contract actually doesn't really know too much about what has been proposed. It just knows when someone later comes and says like, hey, I want to make an execution, it can verify whether that execution was previously agreed to.
Understood. Okay. And is there anything else that you think is salient that we can cover before wrapping up?
I think we've probably I think we've probably run out of time on this one, which is a bit of a shame.
Best not to dive too deep into any further concepts, and perhaps we can do a follow-up. Maybe in our last minute or two, you could just tell us about the future of Across, where you think it's going, and what you're excited about.
Yeah, so we have this messaging feature is, I think, going to be a kind of a key building block that others can start to use, and we're excited to see that happen. So that might be aggregators or different integrators that kind of want to get the benefits of like Across speed and Across low fees, but also then like do more and find out new things, figure out new applications that can be applied on top. So I think that's something that's like coming imminently, and it's been supported in the contracts for quite a while now, but we've just needed to implement the off-chain component of that. So that will be coming very soon. Additionally, like we're following very closely this discussion about intents and interoperability. I think cross-chain interoperability is going to be very big. So like it's basically a question of like how does Across position itself in that space and identify the actors that it can deliver some services to. So I think that there will be hopefully some developments coming in that direction as well.
Fantastic. Paul, I can't thank you enough for coming on board with us. This has been a really amazing show. I do apologize that we had to rush through some aspects, but I think it's much better to dive deeper than cover a wide breadth at a very shallow level. So at least I think our viewers should have a very good understanding of the hub and spoke pool architecture and what Across is doing and what you guys are aiming to do. So thank you for coming on board. We really appreciate you. Huge thanks to our hosts and sponsors of the show, Linum Labs. Linum Labs is an industry-leading Web3 development agency, and our other host and sponsor, Web3 Sanctuary, the spin-off sister company of Linum Labs, focusing on Web3 developer education. Thanks again, and thank you to our viewers for hopping on.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.